Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere and welcome to this week's episode of The Niche Cast. We are from The Niche Cache, theniche-cache.com, where you can find a whole lot of Aotearoa sporting yarn and kōrero. On today's podcast, we are chatting a bit of Blackcaps seam bowling. We've got Joseph Parker, we've got Warriors versus Broncos and Kiwi-NRL. We've got the under-20s football team grinding through their World Cup, and we'll take a look at the New Zealand NBL as well. Under-20s and Warriors are we've also got yarns about them live on our website right now. I did the Warriors versus Broncos preview this morning, Thursday morning, ahead of their Saturday game. And the wildcard, Nico the wildcard, has done his, he's got 2 under-20s wraps for you to eat. Healthy little wrap for you to munch on about under-20s football. Those are live on our website. Also got a Kiwi County Tour breakdown that is live on the website. Got the Flying Kiwis, that's there as well. And who knows, next couple of days, I have been pondering, this is a good one, I have been pondering the Battle of Aotearoa. Tamaki Makaurau versus Team Aotearoa. A viable, plausible state of origin alternative in New Zealand Aotearoa, which I think is lovely. Also, think I'm going to whip up a NRLW signings tracker now that a lot of those, well, it's not a tracker, it's just a breakdown of all the wahine from Aotearoa who have signed to play NRLW, most of whom have come directly from rugby union, which is great to see. That's the type of stuff that you can digest on our website, theniche-cache.com. Also, we've had 2 new patrons over the last few weeks, and this shows how easy it is. We had Caleb, thank you Caleb, the other week, last week, and we also had the bro, the sis, who knows, they, known as C. So shout out to C, both of them. They're supporting the Niche Cache for $1 a month. That's all you need to do to join the Patreon whānau. You can set your own price. We don't care. Like, we're just out here doing what we do for Aotearoa and Aotearoa sport. You can support us directly through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, as much as $1 billion a month, whatever you can afford and want to serve up. It's all honka-dory. We appreciate the support of our patrons, especially the new patrons, and all the OG Kaumatua patrons who keep the Niche Cache and all our content flowing. When you join the Patreon whānau, you do get the extra podcast each week, where we do break down a few different Kiwi sporting ideas, but it is the best way to support the Niche Cache directly. You're supporting the website, you're supporting the podcast, you're supporting the email newsletter as well. So join the Patreon whānau, patreon.com/our Niche Cache, and of course, that email newsletter, pretty much a mandatory sign up at this point, because when you check the other New Zealand sports websites, they're talking all sorts of jibber jabber. We're out here actually breaking down Aotearoa sport, and a lot of the sport that you won't find on other websites. So that email newsletter, we do touch on a lot of different news items and things coming up in the weekend that don't fit the mold of big deep dives on our website. And it's just got all the Niche Cache content there for you. So you don't need to check any social media. You don't need to even go on a website. You can just wait for the Niche Cache to come to you on a Monday and Friday evening via Substack and our email newsletter, thenichecache.substack.com. Sign up. Easy. Done. No whack and furries. We always like to get into a bit of mindfulness for our podcasts. Nico the Wildcard, what have you got for us this week?
Mr. Thich Nhat Hanh, the late great, said, "The seed of suffering in you may be strong, but don't wait until you have no more suffering before allowing yourself to be happy."
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a doozy, that one.
It is a bit tricky to try and feel a bit of happiness when you're suffering. That is a challenge. But to me, it's just part of the human experience. Like, if you're coming from a suffering perspective, that just might be sadness. It might just be melancholy. It might be a lack of gratitude, a little bit of too much dark arts, whatever it is. That suffering, you're feeling it. And that reminds me that you are human and that you're like living the best life of a human because you're feeling that darkness, you're feeling that suffering. But at the same time, you might be able to feel a bit of happiness, which is actually kind of crazy because you can experience both of those together. And especially if you find yourself in more of a suffering pocket of the day, you can always just, through your awareness and through your mindfulness and whatever other practices you practice, you can go towards happiness. You can go towards the light. You can embrace a bit of gratitude. But working in those two elements, to me, is the full human experience.
And because that is the full human experience, it is therefore like an essential part of being a human. Like you can't just avoid suffering your whole life. That is never going to happen. And because of that, you're also never going to find yourself in that place where there is no suffering. That doesn't exist. You're not going to get to that stage because, for one thing, I mean, happiness loses all context if you don't have the opposite of it at the same time. Like, not necessarily at literally the same time, but if you can't relate to both of those things, then neither of them actually mean anything. It's like, well, I mean, that's what he says in the thing, isn't it? Like, don't wait until there's no more suffering before you allow yourself to be happy. The first point there is allowing yourself to be happy. It tells you you have the power to do it. It's not something that you're waiting for someone else to do. It's you make that decision to be happy, and then don't wait till there's no more suffering because you won't find that. Like you won't get to that point where it's like everything is perfect now. Like it's okay to be happy. Just enjoy the whole ride. All the ups and downs.
And there's definitely no shame and no embarrassment in the suffering,
No,
because the
because it's
suffering
universal.
and the suffering is just like a vehicle to take you to the happiness. You just need some awareness to help you move along that journey. We did have an exercise coming into this podcast just to update some of our Blackcap stuff. A lot of this we do talk about in the Patreon podcast, and I just thought, based on our discussion on Tuesday and some of the notes I dropped in the variety show, I thought we'd just quickly rank our Blackcaps ODI World Cup seam bowlers. We're operating under the premise that you're going to have three spinners. You're going to have Mitchell Santner, Michael Bracewell, Ish Sodhi, highly likely to be in the squad. So let's rank our Blackcaps seam bowlers. I'm curious. I've got 8 bowlers here. How many did you have down?
I went with 7 frontliners, but I stretched it out to 10 just to be safe. But the 8, 9, 10 aren't entirely
Righto.
They're less valid. But yeah,
You've got 10. That's fine. Who are your? So just drop your 10. Just name your 10 straight up.
First through, I would go Mr. Trent Bolt. Number 2 is Mr. Matt Henry, and I believe there is a fair bit of distance between 2 and everyone else. Those top 2 they're the guns. Then you come in with Tim Southey, number 3. Hasn't been frontliner for a while, but maybe has moved up. 4, if fit, Kyle Jamieson. 5, Lockie Ferguson, who has dipped down the list a few. He would have been 3. And there is the one asterisk there is I think they're more likely to want a fast bowler if they pick a third seamer there, which might put him or caveats, number 6.
No context. Just give me the list. Give me the list. No other fluff. Just the list.
Yeah, well, Ferguson 5, Milne 6. Likely one of them to play, but then we get into Henry Shipley 7. And then I think there's another big drop off, and then you get guys like Duffy, Tickner. I forgot Doug Bracewell, but maybe he's tied with them. And then I also wanted to squeeze in a bit of Daryl Mitchell at the very end at 10, just for lols. But he actually does have quite a good record when he very, very occasionally gets to bowl in ODIs. He does pick up some wickets. I think he's a useful option, particularly on the slower decks.
Yeah, Daryl Mitchell's not part of this. He's an all-rounder. I've got Trent Bolt, Tim Southey, Matt Henry, Kyle Jamieson, Lockie Ferguson, Adam Milne, Henry Shipley, Blair Tickner. So we've got a similar rankings there. Our difference is you've got Henry over Southey. I've got Southey over Henry. And I think that's actually that's it. I was interested. We both had Henry Shipley ahead of Blair Tickner and the other Jerrys you mentioned at the bottom of your rankings.
Yeah, the Bracewells, the Duffies, the etceteras.
Who was your number 8?
There might be some etceteras. At number 8 was I went Duffy ahead of Tickner.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. The
Well, I actually kind of want Doug Bracewell ahead of both, but it was a personal ranking.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
if you're right, if it was the Gary Stead's rankings, I think Tickner is ahead of both of those guys.
Yes, but the interesting thing is there that Henry Shipley is a factor. And I
Yeah.
think he's a factor because he nibbles the ball. He's got that funky action that we talked about all summer. Neither of us was brave enough to put Milne ahead of Ferguson, despite Lockie Ferguson's form slump recently. But we did have Jamison ahead of Ferguson, even though Jamison hasn't played. So it's like that tells you all you need to know. Like, this frames the Lockie Ferguson situation where, because if he's in form and if he's in like lots of different pockets, he's averaging 20, 25, even 30. I've got him ahead of Jamison just because Jamison doesn't bowl at the moment. But at the moment, Lockie Ferguson's averaging 40, 50, 60, 70. And that's not commanding selection ahead of Jamison at the moment. But then again, we've got Ferguson ahead of Milne. So I think it's pretty stock standard there. Bit rough on Southey, but otherwise all good.
Yeah, well, the trip is coming into a World Cup in India where it's like we've set out this list of up to 10-ish potential options, not including wildcard Daryl Mitchell or a Jimmy Neesham as an all-rounder as well as another option. Probably not going to play. I think you take the spinning all-rounder rather than the seam bowling all-rounder. But it's like, do they pick? They pick three seamers, two frontline spinners. Do they want their all-rounders to cover the fifth bowling option? In which case, you might only pick two spinners and two seam bowlers. Is where it gets a little bit funky. If they picked two, you would expect it to be, or you would prefer it to be Bolt and Southey ahead of Bolt and Henry, assuming they're all there, and then that's your lineup of your team.
I don't know. It's going to change game to game, but like for me, the point of this exercise is more that for the World Cup squad, you've got Bolt, Southey, Henry, Jamison, and Ferguson, which is fantastic. Like, if you're going into a World Cup where you're like, these are our seam bowlers, I'm happy as Larry with that stuff, let alone just a group of good spinners. We've talked about the makeup of the first 11. I'd go three seamers and three spinners, but it's all dependent on a whole bunch of other factors. So, but I think that top five is a fantastic group of bowlers, even if Lockie Ferguson is not in fantastic form. And the fact that Trent Bolt's number one hammers home the point that if Trent Bolt wants to play at the World Cup, he will be playing at the World Cup. And a player of his mana, a player of his caliber in the New Zealand cricket system has already picked and choose his moments, and he's going to continue to pick and choose his moments for major tournaments. Last night, I don't think anyone actually watched it, but if someone did watch it, shout out to you. Definitely not worth a pay-per-view. It was on pay-per-view, right?
Yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure it was like a $40 pay-per-view as well.
That's a Joseph Parker pay-per-view fight on a Wednesday evening. It's not a big draw. And I'd say all the stuff you're surprised, like, oh, George Rose and all that stuff, you could have just asked me. I would have broken that down for you, but because it's all intertwined with rugby league, as we know. Amateur boxing.
They actually had a couple on the lower card. They had a couple of AFL guys fighting against each other as well, randomly.
Like the dirty secret of boxing in this corner is that footy players boxing is more popular than boxers boxing, and I think that's, you can go around the world and like social media stars boxing is bigger than boxing. But yeah, with Joseph Parker, he did have a win. He had a win over Fainga Opelu, who is a Samoan Australian. first round knockout for Joseph Parker, which is pretty impressive considering, oh, Joey Parker is in this position because he doesn't knock anyone out. Opelu, as you said pre-fight, he does have losses to Justice Hooney and Lucas Brown. He's got a win over City Kickboxing's Hemi Ahio, which was a finish, and he's got a loss to Joseph Parker. So that tells you where Opelu sits in this imaginary world of Australasian boxing. He's been defeated by Justice Hooney, Lucas Brown, and Joseph Parker, but he's got a win over Hemi Ahio, which, like, that just makes sense. It just puts you in a certain spot of Australasian boxing where you're not quite at the elite level, but you're there. You're a professional boxer and you're going to, have a bunch of fights. Did you, like, this morning, do you have any different feelings about Parker?
Different feelings. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think some people do because a lot of people have put this pressure on him to be the knockout guy because he's a heavyweight fighter and because heavyweight guys always talk about power and it's the promoters and the marketers have such a big influence in a lot of this stuff and a lot of the narratives and all of this and Parker plays it up himself. He doesn't help his case, but there's always been that like, yeah, I'm going to get a knockout this time. I'm going to knock him out. I'm going to get in there. I'm going to stop him early, sort of thing. And he doesn't do it. And then people hold it against him that he doesn't do it, even though it's like this has never been the fighter that he is. He's not that type of guy. He has other qualities. He has other skills, other reasons why he's a top heavyweight, but knockout power is certainly not one of them. But we saw some knockout power here, which is it's because it wasn't just like the dude got injured or he got cut above his eye and it was like a stoppage for whatever. And it's like, no, he rocked him, then he rocked him again, and then he was about to rock him, but the guy stumbled out of the punch and then the ref stopped it. Like that's it was a really emphatic victory. And it wasn't quite like David Tua 22nd knockout kind of emphatic territory. Parker still doesn't look like a guy who's got, I mean, no one has the power of David Tua's left arm, but like it was different. I guess it's the main thing from Joseph Parker. He showed us something different that he hasn't shown. It was his quickest stop out since like quickest knockout, quickest stoppage since like 2016, I think it was. So what we're talking about there is pre Carlos Takam, like on the rise up, fighting against plumbers, like on those like JUCO fight for life cards kind of stuff. This is therefore like probably the first serious knockout he's had as like a top tier dude, which is nice. He's had other knockouts, but it's been like grinding down weaker opponents kind of thing. This is a powerful first round stoppage. And yeah, it's different. I don't know that it really changes the trajectory, but if people think a little bit differently about him and at least assume that maybe he now has this in his arsenal, even though he probably doesn't, and it probably won't translate to higher opponents, it's still a bit of buzz for him. It's a good bit of momentum for him. It's a nice highlight to live off for a little while until he gets back into the ring, potentially as soon as 2 months, because it's not like this was a particularly grueling one for him. He did look fit though. I thought he did look really fit, and in a way which he hasn't necessarily for a while had the balance of speed and power and this kind of thing for his frame. He did talk up working with that US Marine fella as his strength and conditioning fella, as his nutritionist, as his chef apparently. I heard his trainer saying afterwards, Andy Lee was saying the dude was actually the chef for the camp for them all. So maybe that's worked. Maybe just a little bit of a different approach. But then I also want to be cautious on that because it's one of those things boxers say every fight is like, this was the best preparation we've ever had. The thing that matters is what happens in the ring, and what happened in the ring here was good. Fought a guy who was expected to beat, but he beat him emphatically. That's a solid, nice bit of Joseph Parker momentum. Haven't had that for a little while, have we?
Yeah, but how do you feel about Joseph Parker this morning? Like, you talked all around that. I just want to know how you feel about Joseph Parker this morning based on that performance.
I don't know. That is how I feel. I have to keep things at a slight distance, so that I'm not writing the things and can be objective. But
let me set it up. Like, this is a good win by Parker. He knocked some bloke out in the first round, but this bloke, Fainga Opelu, mad respect to him. Not among the best boxers in Australasia. This was a bit of fanfare. You had Tyson Fury, good buzz, all this other stuff, but first round knockout, it means nothing. Like, for me, it's just like, okay, you knock someone out, great. I don't think many people actually cared about this boxing bout for Joseph Parker. As of this morning, I don't think anyone actually cares about this boxing bout for Joseph Parker. I don't think anything's changed. Let's see him fight someone good again. That's my feelings. Do you have any? You seem like way more diplomatic and you're talking around it, all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what do you reckon?
I mean, I do think the fanfare is not what he would like it to be. You're right. It's a different. He's sort of latching onto this Australian thing where it's like it's just not. It's a bit more unserious as far as boxing goes. It's not quite the limelights that he is aspiring to. That's part of the context. I do think an early stoppage counts for something though. Like if you're gonna have to fight, and realistically, it's a keep busy fight. He wants to get back in the ring in July. He said this. He wants to fight twice more this year. He said that as well, like before the fight and after the fight. He said these things. So by the time he steps into the ring for the next time, this fight doesn't matter. So the only thing that counts is like get through it and get through it nice and emphatically. And he did in a way which he hasn't. So I think there is some promise there. Like there's a little bit of excitement there, in as much as for a Wednesday night Australian bout against a guy who's not on the level that he's been fighting against more recently for the last few years, fighting without a full-time promoter in his corner and whatever, and it was like a bit too gimmicky for my liking in terms of the event overall. But as far as that goes, he did get as much out of it as he could have gotten out of it, I think, which isn't as much, obviously, as beating a top English heavyweight in Manchester or something like that. It doesn't compare to that. But for a keep busy fight, he got some stuff out of that. It was solid enough. But yeah, what matters now is where he goes from this and whether this is like whether he carries on this momentum into the next fight, and then especially the one after that, which is more likely to be the one that matters the most. Because good fight like this, repeat that in a couple months, and then you might be able to wrangle yourself into. It's interesting when they talked about preferred opponents, and a lot of his stuff was like he just names the guys who've beaten him before. It's like, I want to fight Dillian White again. I want to fight what's his name again, and Anthony Joshua, and these dudes like. Good luck getting that one organized, but maybe you can find someone on a Chisora level again and do something cool. He did beat Chisora twice, so we'll see where he goes. I don't believe the hype of Parker being able to compete for another title. I think things would have to be very convenient for that to happen. But I do think he is a gateway kind of heavyweight. Like he can't be a top 10 guy if not a champion, and that's still something to aspire to.
I think a lot of people, they'll be checking in. They see Joseph Parker knock someone out. Some people might think that Joseph Parker suddenly has knockout power.
Yeah. Don't think that is.
Yeah, I think that is a myth, and that's
Yep.
When you look at like Opelu, he was knocked out by Lucas Brown. He was knocked out by Justice Hooney. So when he fights the best heavyweights in Australasia, this is how he loses. And when Joseph Parker fights someone at a lower level, he's probably going to knock them out. But when Joseph Parker fights decent heavyweights in the world, the track record tells us that he doesn't knock anyone out. The New Zealand Warriors, they are going to play in Napier against the Brisbane Broncos, and this is a pretty interesting encounter. There's this idea of the Warriors Roadshow, which I've been enjoying. They had a pre-season trial in Christchurch, got a really good crowd. They've had good crowds at Mount Smart Stadium. Apparently, this is already sold out, this game in Napier for Saturday. It's already sold out. So you're looking at, I don't know, you see some headlines about crowds in Super Rugby and whatnot, but the Warriors aren't having any issues selling tickets to their games. Of course, Tohu Harris is from the Hawke's Bay region, and he is the best Warriors player, as I wrote in my preview this morning. So this is a big game for him in front of his local home community. And it's also interesting because the thing we've talked about with the Warriors passing in the middle forwards, that revolves around Dylan Walker, partly, and Tohu Harris. but Dylan Walker's not playing in this game, so it's a home game for Tohu Harris, and he's probably going to, like, his passing will be more important because Dylan Walker's not playing. So that's something interesting to keep a track of, especially when Tohu Harris, like, I think I wrote that he's played 2 games of 80 minutes with 40 plus tackles and at least 150 run meters. That's what Tohu Harris does most weeks. And that's pretty amazing. Like, I think there's a lot of other fluff around this Warriors team and squad, and everyone's just like overlooks what Tohu Harris can do every week in the NRL. We've also got our first sighting of Luke Metcalf in the halves for the Warriors. He made his comeback in New South Wales Cup the other week against the Bulldogs. He scored a try, but he only played half the game. They were managing his minutes, I think. And he's in the halves. I still have Tamari Martin as the best number 6 at the Warriors to partner Sean Johnson. But Luke Metcalf, and it's interesting because I reckon it's just there's so much clarity in the roles at the Warriors under Andrew Webster. Like Dylan Walker, he's got a very clearly defined role. Come off the bench, passing middle forward, rip in. Ronald Volkman is sitting behind Sean Johnson as a halfback, and he's only played number 6 when there was no Temaida Martin, when there was no Luke Metcalf. And even then, Dylan Walker played a few games at number 6. So I think Ronald Volkman is more of a number 7. He's the backup to Sean Johnson, and Luke Metcalf is the backup to Temaida Martin. But Luke Metcalf is, like, Temaida Martin's skill set is more attacking a short side, scoring a try off a 3-on-3, off a 4-on-4, if not an overlap like a 4-on-3, 3-on-2, making the most of those situations. Whereas Luke Metcalf is more of a dynamic speed running half. And the Warriors do lack a bit of speed. So it's good to have Metcalf in there just as a bit of a change-up, especially when Shantukul Klokstad, as good as he is, he's not dynamically fast. Metcalf is fast, and that's a good asset for the Warriors to have in this game against a good Broncos team. Like, a lot of the noise around the Broncos, they've only got 2 more wins than the Warriors. And keen observers, we've been tracking this for a long time, they will be interested to know that. So last year, Reece Walsh was 2nd for errors. Selwyn Cobbo was 3rd for errors. This year, Selwyn Cobbo is 1st for errors. Reece Walsh is 4th. Neither of them actually playing in this game because they're on State of Origin duty. Reece Walsh at fullback for Queensland. Billy Slater loves him. Reece Walsh loves an error. Curious to see how that goes in the State of Origin arena. But Tristan Saylor, former Dragon, he is named at fullback, and he is 3rd for errors in the Queensland Cup. For context, the Warriors have 1 player in the top 50 for errors in the NRL, and that's Adam Pompey. There is also another one. Broncos are 1st for errors. The Warriors are 17th. So most errors are the Broncos. The fewest errors is the Warriors. And that goes hand in hand with completion rates. That's the Warriors' game plan. So before I touch on some Kiwi-NRL Broncos, chime in.
Well, that's fascinating, that comparison of the errors, because I mean the Warriors' game plan, as you've talked about a lot throughout the year, is like it's quite clear. It's a lot of it is just like it's getting through your sets, it's kicking the ball well. It's like Sean Johnson has been up there all season as one of the leading dudes in terms of total kick meters. I think he was leading at that stat actually. You get through your sets, you kick in the corner, you get them to come in off their line, you get into the arm wrestle, you get into the grind, and then you just outlast them. And the way you outlast teams is that you wait for them to make the first, like they crack first kind of thing. And the way teams crack is errors and giving away penalties and things like that. And the Broncos are clearly the exact kind of team. Like it's a great opportunity for the Warriors in a couple of regards, because you do have the Broncos weakened by State of Origin. You also have the Broncos at home. Admittedly, a home game taken to a different region, but that's still like that's going to have its own atmosphere, its own buzz, and a big home crowd that are all going to be supporting the Warriors as well. And then the other thing is that they're playing against a better team that has had a lot of hype around them and have been playing really well, but by the sounds of it, might just be extremely susceptible to the specific way that the Warriors like to play and win NRL games.
Yeah, the only kind of asterisk caveat, which you love to dish up in your rankings, is the Broncos are a very powerful team, even without their origin players. Like Katoni Staggs is still in the centers, right? Like you still got Herbie Farnworth, you still got a very robust team, and no matter how many errors the Broncos make, they're able to bust tackles. They're able to, like, I think they've still got Ezra Mam, Adam Reynolds. Like there's still a lot of attacking funk in that Broncos team, and I think the veteran nature of some of the Warriors, or of the Warriors team, is going to work in their favor with what you said. Because we saw against the Bulldogs, the Warriors kind of won that game first with Chance Nickel-Klokstad catching every Matt Burnham bomb, and he'd take a run. Next run, Dylan Waitene-Zelezniak running like a psycho. Next run, Marcelo Montoya running like a psycho. Bang. 30 meters, 40 meters. And those dudes are all experienced players who can handle good kicking games. But like, there's a lack of speed until you see Waitene-Zelezniak hitting the ball up, because he's running like a psycho and he runs really fast, but he's running fast into like 4 defenders, which is all good for his role. But that's a very experienced back three. Sean Johnson's in the house, steering the team around. No Dylan Walker with the ball playing, but you still got Fanua Blake, Tohu Harris, and some very solid forwards in there as well. Whereas maybe the weak areas for the Warriors could be the centers coming up against the Broncos centers and some of those younger pockets for the Warriors. But that flows into the Kiwi-NRL Broncos because Dean Mariner comes onto the wing as part of the origin to plug an origin hole, and Xavier Willison also comes into the Broncos team. Like these are, like, we've talked a lot about the Kiwi-NRL juniors in the Broncos system. There's a lot of them. They're all really good. They're basically all of the same caliber as Jordan Ricky, who was winning everything in New Zealand as a junior out of Christchurch. But this is an interesting gauge to learn about these young players because Dean Mariner's named on the wing. He'll do a good job on the wing, but he's primarily a centre, and I'm curious about him versus Rocco Berry, not in a direct matchup because Rocco Berry is probably going to be tackling Herbie Farnworth, I think. But as just as young players, Dean Mariner, good, really good player from New Zealand, moves to Australia in the Broncos system, Australian schoolboys, best player in Queensland. Rocco Berry, as long as he's healthy, like they always put him in the NRL team. Like as soon as he's played a game in New South Wales Cup, he's back in the NRL team. I think the Warriors and the Mount Smart crew, they love Rocco Berry. So it's just like, who impacts the game more? Because Rocco Berry was a really good first 15 player who the Warriors wanted to go after and sign straight out of high school from St. Pat's Silverstream in Wellington. So it's just an interesting matchup. Dean Mariner versus Rocco Berry as young Kiwi-NRL players. Jordan Ricky, I think the matchup there is Marata Niokori. Now, again, they might not play on the same edge, but I'm just looking who impacts this game more. I love Marata Niokori, the Mangere Mountain. Also really like Jordan Ricky. Jordan Ricky is a far more high-profile young player. The thing about Jordan Ricky, like, it's hard to quantify like what he does well because he's always missing tackles. Sometimes he doesn't rack up many run meters, but you only need to look at the fact that he plays every week in the NRL. And he's only like 21, 22 years old. And the best sign of a good young player is if they play or not. And Jordan Ricky, as soon as he made his debut, He was playing every single week, and that's a great sign of his talent. But again, Marata Niukore is really good. I love Marata Niukore. I love Jordan Ricky. It's an interesting battle. Then you've got a Xavier Willison. He's from Waikato, and the Broncos recruited him basically out of nowhere. He goes to Palm Beach Currumbin on the Gold Coast as part of the Broncos setup, along with Dean Mariner. He's really good. He's massive. He's mobile. Is he better than Dimitri Sifakula? Is he better than Tom Alley? I'd say straight up right now, yes. But I'm curious to see that matchup. I'm curious to see who impacts this game more off the bench. Because, like, Sifakula's 19 years old and he's pretty good. Tom Alley, he's been really good as well off the bench for the Warriors. So it's just an interesting game. Apart from watching the Warriors try to win a game of footy in the NRL, I'm just looking at some of those matchups just to learn about those players. Because something we've talked a lot about where, okay, Cameron Ciraldo, he's the Bulldogs coach and he was the Panthers defense coach, but the Bulldogs aren't as good at defense as the Warriors. And it's like all these little pockets of comparison. It's like, okay, this player is the trendiest player in Australia, but when he played against the Warriors, he was outplayed by this dude. And that goes deeper into like New South Wales Cup because 17-year-old Leka Halasima, he's starting and he might be the best young player in New South Wales Cup. But again, he's not getting the same kind of headlining status as other Australian prospects. And that all comes together. Like there's other examples of just like a player who doesn't outperform their Warriors equivalent. And I'm curious how some of these Kiwi-NRL Broncos perform against the Warriors, because ever since Dean Mariner, Willison, they popped up in Palm Beach Currumbin and they dominated Queensland footy, they have been among the best like Kiwi-NRL juniors, let alone the young players on the fringe of NRL footy. But we're also seeing that some of these young Warriors are really good at rugby league, let alone the fact that there's a 17-year-old starting in New South Wales Cup while still at high school. So I'm curious to see how some of these young Warriors perform against more high-profile Broncos equivalents.
Yeah, nice. It's the one thing that stuck with me from what you're saying right at the very start about the lack of Dylan Walker in this game, and the fact that it means you don't have that sort of like two-pronged thing with like the passing out of the middle from Walker and from Harris in particular. Harris is still there. He'll do an outstanding job at that because he's one of the best in the world at doing that exact, executing that skill set, as they say. Are there other dudes? Because we have talked a bit about some of their recruitment, I think, on the Patreon podcast this week and some of the stuff last week, some of the recruitment and how they are looking to sign a certain type of player who can be versatile and can offer like a skill set beyond their specialist position in a lot of areas. Is that something you see, whether it's from the current dudes on the bench this week, or is that all through the New South Wales Cup players? Is that like a specific thing that you see this team really going for? Like that playmaking out of their middle forwards?
That's a complex question because there's so many different elements like going on. I think like all these dudes can pass, right? Like we've seen Fanua Blake pass the ball a lot. Bunty Afoa is probably developing his passing game. An important thing here is that while Andrew Webster was coaching the Panthers, James Fisher-Harris's passing game got more and more notable. So it was like Isaiah Yeo did a lot of the passing, does a lot of the passing. Fisher-Harris does less passing than Yeo, but more passing than Moses Leota. And like some of the shapes they had Harrison, like it's not just like you get the ball, you pass it to the guy next to you. You like Yeo is the best at it, Harris is the best at it, Murray's the best at it, where they get the ball and they've got their own shape around them. And we saw the Fanua Blake try against the Bulldogs. That was Dylan Walker as a middle forward going into the middle with Tohu Harris running a decoy and Sean Johnson out the back and Fanua Blake running a short line. Like that is a specific shape for Dylan Walker. That's a shape for Tohu Harris that if Dylan Walker's not playing. So it's very different from just like a prop getting the ball and passing it to another prop. Like the best ball players in the middle, they have shapes around them. So like Fanua Blake might have some shapes around him. Bunty Afoa probably won't have shape around him. My point was James Fisher-Harris. There have been examples where he has been passing with some sort of shape around him, and I think that's an Andrew Webster wrinkle. But the Warriors, it's complicated because now we're getting into some of the recruitment. I don't want to go too deep on this. I had like a moment where I was like, I can do a full Warriors preview and I can write way too much. Like we both write way too much. Like we just love to spin a yarn and it's fine. Oftentimes we talk too much on the podcast. It's all good. It's what we do. It's what we love to do. And I didn't mention Chanel Harris-Tavita at all in the Warriors preview. And like a lot of it is just I want to.
Well, he's not playing this weekend.
Yeah, like he's not. That's all next season, right? And like it's, yeah. But so when you go into New South Wales Cup, these dudes like they will need to pass. Zion Maiu is going to be developing a passing game. Sifakula, LA, they are developing passing games because Andrew Webster is great at developing that skill set. As we said on the Patreon podcast, Chanel Harris-Tavita played one World Cup game in the halves. 6 games, he played 1 game in the halves. So when you're looking at like a Dylan Walker type of player, the Warriors signed one, Chanel Harris-Tavita. Like, I think Chanel Harris-Tavita is going to play a very versatile role for the Warriors, offering depth in all positions, but he's a tough bugger who can pass the ball. That's what Dylan Walker is. We also talked about Tom Summer, who the Warriors signed from Queensland. He's an Australian from Queensland who is a prop with a very good passing game. You can go look at his highlights on YouTube, and it's very hard running, very fast, very aggressive, but it's like running hard and then a late pass. And that's like a natural skill set that I think the Warriors are targeting, because why else would you sign an Australian player to play SG ball? You're doing that because you want to fill some sort of void in your system. And I think that's what the Warriors are doing. And actually, it's fully aligned with signing Chanel Harris-Tavita. Like, these are players who fit a certain mold, and the Warriors want that mold, because I don't think there's many players in their system that have that skill set. So I think, like, the Warriors right now, Tohu Harris is more than capable of playing this role by himself. And the thing for this game against the Broncos is that it's like the Warriors are showing different attacking styles. There is this passing thing in the middle, but now we've also got Metcalf with a bit of speed. When Tamaita Martin's playing, it's like, okay, 4-on-4 down a short side, nothing doing, try, because it's Tamaita Martin. And I think that's what we're going to see in this game against the Broncos is, yeah, you'll see a lot of passing from Tohu Harris. I think he only had 12 passes against the Bulldogs. You'll probably see that get up over 15, maybe 20 against the Broncos, because he's going to be doing most of it. But you're also going to see like the Warriors showcase some different attacking elements. So in summary, yes, the Warriors do appear to be signing players who fit a certain skill set as distributors. But also the Warriors have also shown variance in their attacking systems. How about that?
Beauty. Shall we stroll through some of these other NRL games as well? In particular, I would like to hear what to watch out for tonight when I watch the old Redcliffe Dolphins against the Dragons, looking for a win streak. I can't believe it. It's been so long.
Well, not much to do with the Dragons, but you do have Valence Tefare, the house. He is on the bench.
Hey.
Which is quite interesting because he is a robust old chap, Valence Tefare, and he could play as a forward, some type of forward. He's very explosive, very dynamic, especially when you're looking through the Redcliffe team. There's a lot of dudes who don't play their position. Like Tessie New was a fullback at the Broncos, kind of bit of a number 6, kind of bit of a centre. He's a winger. Cody Nikorima's playing fullback this week. Kenny Bromwich has been playing prop. Like, it's just what the Dolphins do under Wayne Bennett, so I can see Valence Tafade coming off the bench as a robust forward. Of course, he might not. But that's what I'd watch out for you as a Dragons fan, would be Valence Tafade. Otherwise, you do have Kenny Bromwich on one edge, and you do have Connolly Lemuelu on the other edge. Lemuelu's from Otara, Kenny Bromwich from Manurewa, and that's an interesting matchup against Jack Bird and Ben Murdoch Masila. Eels versus Cowboys. Just the full Kiwi-NRL Eels experience is the funky thing there. Not much to add. Rabbitohs versus Raiders, again. Loving Matthew Tomoko and Jordan Rapana. Joseph Tapine, fantastic. Corey Harawira-Naira has been out of the Raiders rotation for a couple of weeks, and he's back starting edge forward in place of Hudson Young. And then you've got Knights versus Sea Eagles. Similar thing for the Sea Eagles, because they've got Christian Tuipulotu on the bench. And he is a very, like, he was basically maybe an edge forward a lot of the time in junior footy in Auckland, like representative player as well. So he could do some sort of job as a bench forward, but he's probably just covering a few positions. And of course, the Knights have Leo Thompson and Greg Marshew in their team, but we probably need to keep wiggling along here to some other sports because we do have under 20s football. I don't want to give you too much space for this, but you do love to talk about the ebbs and flows of this team in the tournament. So I'm going to ask you more about the players, but I will give you a bit of space here just to ramble about what's doing with this team, because we talked on, might have been the Patreon podcast, how they were, they're too passive against this team, and then they changed their formation and blah, blah, blah. The basics is they had a win over Uzbekistan earlier in the week, and then they had a draw against...
They had a win over Guatemala 1-0, and then a draw against Uzbekistan 2-2.
So, and now they play Argentina. Wait, so my point here was that this is basically the Kiwi football recipe at a World Cup. And we're all pretty positive about the under-20s having a win and a draw. And they're probably going to lose against Argentina. Fair play. It's Argentina in football. This is, to me, this is probably what the football fans are going to do as well. And if the football fans do this, a win, a draw, and a loss, like, that's perfectly fine. And I think
it would be their best ever World Cup if they did that.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I think for a lot of Kiwi sports fans, they're like, oh, they're in a World Cup. Yeah, well, Kiwi football teams in World Cups, they're lucky if they get a win. And if they get a win...
They're lucky if they get a draw.
Well, yeah, just let me set up.
At senior level, yeah.
If they get a win, they're probably also going to go get a draw, and they're probably also going to go get a loss. That is the world of football. So any casual observer, any hearty football fans observer, I'm confident they'll get a win in pool play, but everyone needs to know that the way the world is with football, New Zealand teams highly unlikely to get 2 wins in pool play, right? Like, that is the norm for Kiwi teams in World Cups. What impressed you in the draw against Uzbekistan from the win over Guatemala?
Well, funnily enough, on the tactical thing where I was saying at the Guatemalan game, I thought they didn't need to play with the back 5. They could have had that extra guy further forward, and when they switched it up, they scored, and then they switched it back to close it out, but that was fine because he had the lead intact. Funnily enough, they started with the back 4, the 4-2-3-1 formation in the second game, We're 2-0 up at half time and then switched it back to back five in the second half and drew 2-2. So they've scored 3 goals in the back four so far, and they've scored 0 goals and conceded 2 with the back five. But jury's out on whether that was inevitable, the Uzbekistan comeback, regardless of how they shaped. I'm not convinced that was necessarily anything to do with it. And the 2 goals they scored were 2 wonderful individual strikes as well. So it's not necessarily like the extra guy was a big difference necessarily in the way that game played out. What impressed me the most was just that Uzbekistan were really good. Like, they are the Asian champions. They won the Asian under-20s qualifying group. They also hosted that tournament, but they won it too. Like, that's still true. Like, they knocked Australia out on penalties in the quarterfinals. I think they took out South Korea in the semifinals, and I can't remember who they beat in the finals, like Iran or someone like that. But like legitimate footballing nations there, even including Australia in that. Uzbekistan, this wave of Uzbekistani players took care of them. Uzbekistan dominated possession. They had like 30 shots in this game. The fact they scored a couple goals was, probably they would have been pretty pissed off if they hadn't scored a couple of goals, the dominance that they had. What was impressive from the Kiwi side is that they defended backs to the wall, bodies on the line kind of thing extremely well for the majority of this game. Finn Surman was outstanding. Isaac Hughes next to him was really good as well. They did tire, and there were a couple, like, it's both. One goal was soon after halftime. The other was in stoppage time near the end. Like, they almost held on for the win, but also they were pretty lucky not to lose. The only reason they're in that position as well is because their attacking players had a level of I want to say like ruthlessness, finishing ability, but that sort of suggests something else. That suggests like just being able to pop a header in from 10 yards or following up on a shot and just, making. This was different. This was long range shots that were just like one right in off the post in the bottom corner, the other one top corner over the keeper after a nice little turn. Like, little just magical moments that there are only 2 shots in the first half. There were only 2 shots. They were 2 goals, set them up for something special. That defensive performance looks different if you're hanging on to a 0-0. And if they were hanging on to a 0-0, they probably would have just ended up losing because they wouldn't have been able to hold on the whole time against the as I said, very strong Uzbekistani team.
Who scored the goals, sorry?
The goals were scored, one from Ben Wallace and then one from Jay Herdman. Ben Wallace, Wellington Phoenix prospect, who was probably the bolter in the squad, the unlikeliest guy. He wasn't part of qualifying. He wasn't part of the quad series they played a couple months ago. First time he got called up was for the tournament thing himself. So he's really obviously, he's had a pretty good start with the Phoenix this year, and he did some nice things in the National League. So he's worked his way in there. Jay Herdman, meanwhile, was the player of the tournament in qualifying and has been a bit of the star player the whole way through. So a bit more of a known quantity, but yeah, 2 outrageously good, especially Herdman's one, unreal goal. And that just gave this team a boost that allowed them to bring out the best in their defense as well. So the fact that they were so close to winning but didn't is disappointing, but also the fact that they got a draw in a game they got dominated in, bigger picture, is pretty impressive because it's not the kind of thing that you'd normally get from a Kiwi team at these kind of tournaments, at least not until recent years. We're starting to see this a little more often with the younger squads, in particular. Senior levels obviously much harder, but we are starting to see this kind of thing from them, and it's cool. It's a bit of a different I don't know, it's a new era.
We do love to talk about these young folks as like part of learning about the sports teams and organizations that we follow closely. Case in point, learning about the Warriors juniors, Sifakula, Halasima, Ali Leotawa, like all those folks. We've got a fine example and reason for Wellington Phoenix people to be heavily invested in this tournament, because some of the players you mentioned, Finn Surman, centre back, Finn Conchi, has been assisting in a few of these goals, and you mentioned Ben Wallace as well. You also mentioned on the Patreon podcast how you were enjoying the Wellington Phoenix kind of building out their system and the clarity they're operating with, which I said this last Thursday, like the Warriors are building an effective and efficient system. And I think the Wellington Phoenix are doing the same thing. And that's coinciding with some really good performances by Wellington Phoenix players at this World Cup at a time when old mate Chief and the entire Wellington Phoenix organization appears to be moving towards a lot of junior players in their system, promoting from within, developing coaches, developing players, as we have seen the Warriors do after the pandemic era. So there is that extra wrinkle, like Kiwi football fans are going to be interested. I'm sure your Flying Kiwis perspective is firing as well, just like kind of pondering the possibilities of where some of these lads might end up overseas. You mentioned Jay Herdman. This performance might propel him into more consistent footy in Canada. But there's also that Phoenix wrinkle where it's like, these players that we're seeing right now, Finn Sermon, Finn Conchi, Ben Wallace, any other players I've missed that I don't know of, these players may be stepping into Wellington Phoenix football next season, and they are the dudes who are going, they are the new signings. They are the guys who are going to fill out the depth and offer backup players in different positions. Maybe Finn Sermon starts the season at centre back, who knows? But the thing I find really interesting is there is a deep Wellington Phoenix groove in this under-20s team at a time when the Wellington Phoenix do appear to be moving in a more development club direction.
Yeah, and there's probably a little bit too much Wellington Phoenix influence in this under-20 squad, but that's just the nature of the players that were available at the moment. The Phoenix are firing nicely. The Academy don't have as much of a presence as they have in the past. Those two academies have pretty much led the way with developing players, and that's how it goes. And one benefit that the Phoenix players have is that they've played for multiple years together. So the spine of the team, you've got like when they've had a back three of Sermon, Kelly, Heald, and Hughes, all Phoenix players, existing combinations. It's easy to translate that into a team like this. Midfield of it was Jackson Manuel and Finn Conchi in one game, it was Finn Conchi and Dan Mackay in the other game, all Phoenix players, you know? It's like there's the spine of the team there through defense and midfield are Knicks guys. Like they've got existing relationships there of how to play with each other. And Conchi is a really good example of what you're talking about, because they have said that, you know, Clayton Lewis has left, Steven Ugarkovic has left. They've lost a couple of midfielders. They've signed this Moel Tai, the Australian CDM fella, but they also want another midfielder from the academy based on things I've seen, you know, reported in a couple of different places, likely to offer one of their senior contracts to one of the Phoenix midfielders, which is a pretty well stocked area at the moment. You tend to get that with academy football when they've been working in a system with consistent coaching for a long time. You tend to get quite well-rounded players, so you get a lot of central midfielders. You don't necessarily get as many like, you know, brave, courageous defenders or poaching finishers or kind of thing. Like you kind of overly mold players into a little bit more of a similar thing. You get a lot of midfielders. Phoenix actually do have some very good central defenders. They don't really have the strikers in this current generation, which is why you're seeing Ollie Kaloti and Kean Donkers doing a lot of the stuff, sort of tag team in the centre forward stuff. But if there's a spot available in the senior squad, so a central midfielder, I think Finn Conchi's already earned it. I mean, he's been one of the leading dudes for 2 years now in the Phoenix reserves team. He's also been astoundingly good in these 2 games of the World Cup so far, where he's actually set up all 3 of their goals, and he's been really good defensively. Passing's great. Like he's an excellent player who is playing better than I've ever seen him play before, and I've seen him play quite a few times. Playing better than I've seen him play before at the highest level that he's played. I think that also is a massive tick in the dude's favor. I'd say there's a pretty decent chance we see him in the senior group. Obviously, all of these guys have spent time training with the senior group in the past, but I'm talking about getting like contracted full time, making match day squads and stuff. And yeah, Finn Sermon, I expect also is he didn't play as much last year as he did the season before for the senior team, but I think that was a little bit less to do with being underused last year and more to do with being overused the year before, pushed into a situation where he's starting to run a games ahead of perhaps where he was not necessarily where he was ready for, but where the expected trajectory was for his career. He was playing a lot more because they had a lot of injuries in that area. But by the sounds of it, Kellen Elliott's leaving. Looks like probably Tim Payne will slide out to right back next season. And if that happens, they do want to sign another import centre back. So you have Scott Wooden and another import as your starting centre backs. But Nico Boxall's left. Josh Laws he's left as well. Finn Sermon might very well be your backup centre back in that case, in which case he will get plenty of games over the course of the season. And I think he's reached the point now where he's ready for that. He's ready to play a lot more often. When I say he was heroic against Uzbekistan, I don't mean that lightly. I mean, he was like jumping into sliding blocks all over the place. He was winning headers. He was emphatic with his centre backery there. And yeah, there's some good players from this team that we're going to see a lot more of in overseas situations, but also with the Wellington Phoenix in the A-League. These dudes are ready for that close-up.
When do they play Argentina?
They play Argentina at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning.
And you don't seem to think that is a automatic loss.
I think it's probably a loss. I won't say an automatic loss for two reasons. One is that Argentina have already qualified. So they've got 6 points. They've won their first two games. They don't have to worry about that. They are the home nation. So there's that factor. The crowd is going to be entirely for them. But they haven't looked crazy impressive in these other games. And I think there's a good reason for that as well, which is the other reason, is that they weren't even supposed to be here. Like, they didn't qualify. Their team didn't qualify through the South American ranges. They're there because they're the backup hosts who came in at late notice. So they didn't actually get really a preparation for this tournament. And a lot of the top players that they wanted to pick, the best Argentina players available at an under 20 age, already playing first team for European clubs and for clubs in Argentina. Those seasons are ongoing. Those players have not been released. Like, they're only getting the ones who are still in reserve teams or are fringes of first teams. Like, there's a dude from Juventus, there's a dude from Man City there, but they're obviously, it's not a guy who's competing with Erling Haaland for minutes at City or anything like that. So they might be a little more vulnerable. They also might take their eye off the ball slightly. This is hopeful stuff. Most likely they'll win, and probably win relatively handily. But if the Kiwis don't get thrashed, should still make the knockout rounds. I expect Uzbekistan to beat Guatemala. If they don't, we're through. If we get anything off Argentina, we're through. If, as expected, Uzbekistan beat Guatemala, Argentina beat New Zealand, then what happens is we just got to make sure we're one of the top 4 third place qualifiers. And there's 6 groups. So we'd only need 2 groups to have a team who finishes below 4 points for us to go through. Usually that happens. More often than not, a team in the situation that the Kiwi under-20s are in right now will make the knockouts of the under-20 World Cup. It would be nice if they did it by getting a result off Argentina, but yeah, I won't say automatic result because they are a bit vulnerable, but I don't necessarily think we're the team to be able to punish them. So probably looking at results elsewhere, but those results elsewhere should be favorable for us. And if not, I mean, you're unlucky to miss out. And if you're unlucky, so it goes. You kind of got to cop that sometimes in sports.
Let's finish with New Zealand NBL basketball, where we have 4 clear teams with winning records. The Otago Nuggets are 7-1. Auckland Tuatara are 6-3. Canterbury Rams are 6-2. Franklin Bulls are 5-3. Then we get into teams with losing records. So we'll keep our focus on the top 4 as we have done throughout the season. And this is an interesting weekend for the Canterbury Rams, as they are the only team playing 2 games this weekend, to the best of my knowledge. Does that sound...
Of the top 4, yeah, they're the only team playing doubleheader.
So we do... And the Canterbury Rams are playing Taranaki and Wellington, who are... Well, Taranaki are last, 2-6 record. Wellington have crept up to 7th. They've got a 3-5 record. So this is an interesting patch of basketball for the Canterbury Rams. We've got Otago Nuggets taking on the Hawke's Bay Hawks this weekend. That's first versus ninth. And we also have Southland versus Hawke's Bay Hawks. So we got two Hawke's Bay Hawks games. Manawatu versus Tuatara Franklin Bulls versus Nelson Giants. Do you have I don't imagine you've got any update on the Otago Nuggets, Funk. We've talked a lot about the Otago Nuggets in recent weeks since they started dominating the NBL.
Well, they did lose their first game last week. They went down to the Auckland Tuatara, who had a massive week. I did mention this on the variety show. Yeah. Tuatara went down south, beat Otago, and then beat Canterbury, and very much, helped forge that top four by giving themselves a boost up the rankings. But yeah, Nuggets is just it felt. I did watch that game, and it just felt like one of those ones where they were 7-0. They caught a good team on a good day, and it was just they weren't. They went down early, but they did have Ja'Cory McLaughlin, I believe, almost got them back into the game, unlikely, by scoring 39 points. American import, that is the highest scoring individual game of the season so far. Gave them a chance, wasn't enough, but I think it was just an off day from the Nuggets. I don't think that's anything other than just one of them ones you get along the course of the season.
The 2-game Ram stint is interesting because it's the post-Ty Wynyard era. What are you looking for with the Canterbury Rams over this weekend? As I said, playing the Wellington Saints and Franklin and Taranaki. Neither team has been that great this year. Is there anything in particular you're looking for the Canterbury Rams to kind of solidify themselves as a upper echelon NBL team?
Well, it is definitely mid-season shuffle point in the season. You're seeing quite a few teams switch things up a little bit, and the Rams did release one of their American imports who signed with, might have even been Taranaki, I can't remember, but potentially clearing a little bit of room to find a Wynyard replacement. Maybe we'll see how that goes, but they have in the meantime at least brought back Tom Webley, who's a local fella, been doing the college ball stuff. He's in between his college seasons at the moment. He had a bit of a breakout season with Canterbury. I think it was 2 years ago before he went to college, and he played 17 minutes in his first appearance last week, and they lost to Tuatara. He's solid. He's not Ty Wynyard. He's not going to give you that kind of production, but he'll at least be another big body for them to help lean on. Max Darling is another one you'd hope will have he wasn't anywhere near his best in that Tuatara game, but he's another one who can maybe cover some of that gap of what they've lost in production there. Walter Brown has had some ups and downs through the season, but when he's been on, he's been fantastic. He's another one who can help them. They've got good local players, and local, not just Kiwi players, but local Cantabrian players there in all three cases to help them get through this, but I suspect there might be another import signing on the way as well. I certainly think if they're serious about contending for the title, they probably should be doing that as well. Probably should be bringing in a dominant big man to lead the way, because they've lost their domestic guy who they didn't expect to lose. It was a bit of a sudden thing when he got this offer from the old Chinese 3x3 professional tournament. No one quite saw that coming, but all the top teams that we're talking about in these top four have big men who can, bring in big rebounds and defend the rim. You probably need that in order to keep pace with the other guys. So I expect that's what we're going to see from Canterbury, but it won't happen this week. So, it's up to them local fellas to cover the gap and maybe get them a couple wins over a doubleheader weekend.
As we all know, Aotearoa, we got a lot of centre backs. We've got a lot of big men in basketball. A lot of the best Kiwi players are big men, especially in that top four kind of realm. Rob Lowe, Timmins, Darling, Webley, Harrison, or lots of other dudes as well. Kalman Poto, Tane Samuel, Vodanovic. There's just so many big dudes from Aotearoa. I'm curious about the local Kiwi guards, especially in that top four. And you mentioned, as you're talking through Canterbury, I was thinking a lot about Taylor Britt, who is just the perfect guard for a team like that. Get the ball to the right dude at the right time, control the tempo, control the flow of the game. Who are some other Kiwi guards in those best teams? Because it does feel like a position, especially in those top teams, that is more import based. So I'm not sure how you feel about that. But are there any other Kiwi guards in the top four teams that you want us to keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think especially in this era of basketball with big emphasis on 3-pointers and whatever, like I think you tend to get whenever there are leagues that allow imports, you tend to get the imports coming in those positions because they're high scoring positions. So there's not an abundance. Like most of these top four teams, they're all leaning on their foreign guards. The one big wrinkle there is, like I mentioned, McLaughlin with the Nuggets, but the one little sneaky one with the Tortara is that their imports are not Americans. Their import guards are Cam Glidden and Jared Weeks, who are Australian, and also playing, especially Jared Weeks, playing fantastically. Um, the Canterbury Rams are the exception, though, because they do have Taylor Britt. And Taylor Britt is a starting level point guard in the NBL who is not going to come in and score you big points. That's one of the reasons why Winyata we missed, is because he was a reliable scorer inside, like that post-presence stuff. But Taylor Britt is one of the leading players in terms of assists per game, particularly if you look at Kiwi guards. He is the leading assist maker. I think Alex McNaught might have actually been up there as well in a similar one from outside the top four, but Breaker's development player. Maybe the Nelson Giants will make a run and sneak up to that top four. They should be challenging for top six. They had a big win on the weekend. So yeah, Taylor Britt is the dude to look for. He had a couple years doing like development player stuff with the Perth Wildcats. Didn't quite get to the point where he got a senior contract, but he's just come back and dominates the show for Canterbury Rams. One of them table setting guards. He's not the big scorer, but he will like shuffle everyone around. He will get guys in the right position, and he will make sure the ball gets to those guys in the right position as well. Excellent player. They do have Quinn Clinton as well on the bench behind him, who's just finished his college stint in the USA. Only really getting like 10 to 15 minutes per game, but he's a solid Kiwi backup point guard as well. So there's a few options. As far as the very best guards in the competition go, the only Kiwi dude who's competing with the imports is there Moriahuhu Leafa, who plays for Wellington Saints, who not even in the top six as it stands, but they might be making a run because of him. So we'll see. He's the one dude, like there's guys who can assist, there's guys who can score, like Daron Rokara is a good example of the guard who can score. I should mention Franklin Bulls as well, have Jaden Bazant as their backup guard, who is a dude who on his day can come in and score a bunch of points as well, and is a good passer. So that's cool. But yeah, Leafa is the one dude who can score, shoot, assist, defend as well. As probably his defense is as good as any aspect of his game. He's the one guy who does everything. Don't really have a Kiwi guard on those other teams who do that, but they do have definitely all those teams have at least the facilitating guys off the bench, like a Bazan, or a Taylor Britt starting, or dudes like that who aren't there to be the key players, but are certainly helping the key players be the best versions they can be.
Lovely jubbly. Let's wrap it up there. That is the Niche Cast for this week. Check in with the Niche Cache, all our channels. However you want it, it's there for you. Big up yourself, love yourself, kia kaha, stay beautiful, church.